This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Baglin.
Delighted to have in the chair today Kentucky's declared expert on black bears. However, I'll say this, pretty much anybody who lives in eastern Kentucky is an expert on bears. You get it from something called street sense when your home address is in bear country. But in the studio is Steven Dobey, who has made bears his life. Plus, we'll take a listen to some bear sounds and a special report on wasps as we go inside outdoors this week on Kentucky Afield Radio.
It's grime time.
The Gauntlet at Otter Creek, Kentucky's premier mud run.
Come run the gauntlet, just 20 minutes south of Louisville. Miles of slime pits, net climbing, and obstacle-filled adventure.
Adrenaline in a flood of mud.
Run solo, form a team.
Run 5 miles or 8 for everyone 12 and up.
The Gauntlet at Otter Creek.
Saturday, August 17th.
Get the dirt on the Gauntlet at Otter Creek at KentuckyWildlife.com.
Reflexes and instinct make a difference in whatever you do.
Helicopter rescue swimmer Mike Baersky, United States Coast Guard.
It may not be your first impulse, but from where I sit, water accidents don't always give you a chance to think twice. If you love boating, the one thing you can do to automatically make it great is reach for your life jacket. Your life jacket's got your back.
Kentucky conservation officers remind you, your life jacket's got your back. And the backing of the best swimmers everywhere. This is Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglin. Subject of the show today is bears. When I think about bears, 2 things come to mind. One is that they're big, they're mean, they're evil, they'll kill you. 2 is that they're cute, they're cuddly, they're cartoon characters. They're just big old lazy bumpkins. And so I don't know which one is true. And maybe both are true. I guess it depends if you're watching the news or if you're watching Saturday morning cartoons or cookie commercials. It's really hard to distinguish fact from fiction. We have bears, and we would like to talk today with Steven Dobey, who is the black bear biologist for the state of Kentucky, working for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. You're the man who knows bears. Let's just do a little pop quiz and see what the answers to these are. I've got them written down, Stephen. True or false? Do bears crap in the woods?
True.
True or false? Don't feed a bear because you can never fill him up.
That's very true.
So that is a true statement. You should not feed one because you can't fill him up.
And you should not feed one because there's a distinct possibility you could be harmed in doing so.
Another question. The people who liken bears to Yogi Bear are the same group of people that liken deer to Bambi.
That is very true.
That old line about coming between a mama bear and her cubs is okay as long as you're nice to the little baby bears.
That is false. You never want to get between a female and her offspring.
You got all of those right.
Excellent.
Now, I want to go back and I want to put myself, because instantly I know anybody hearing this, let's say you're in Madisonville or Somerset, one of our affiliate stations, and you're listening to this. And I'm going to assume Madisonville is probably a little safer from bears than Somerset. But at some point, they're going to say, if you really want to be in the bear zone, you need to be in the thick of it over in eastern Kentucky. We live here. We see these every day. We know what the dangers are. And so I have a feeling that somebody's going to look at the radio and laugh because we don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I have to give them a little bit of credit for that because they are there. And you and I, today at least, are not. We're doing the show talking about summertime bears, and bears are doing what this time of year?
Couple things going on. In June in particular is the breeding season for black bears, meaning that males are roaming all over the place looking for females to breed. And what happens, these bears roam over just incredible home ranges. These bears really increase the likelihood that they're going to come in contact with people while looking for these females. And at the same time, the mother bears have kicked out their offspring. So these yearling bears are on their own for the very first time, trying to establish a home range while trying to stay out of the way of these bigger, more dominant bears, and it's almost like a pinball machine. You got bears roaming all over the place, young bears trying to stay out of the way of the more dominant males. The probability that they're going to come in contact with a neighborhood or people or a campground dramatically increases in June and July.
So you have mother bears who are on their own and they're being pursued. If that mother bear was a deer, are they running like deer do in the fall from the pursuing bear?
Not necessarily. Female bears tend to have a very small home range in comparison. They don't roam very far at all. They find the best habitat and they park it there and they stay there. That's what enables them to have cubs. They know they surround themselves with the highest quality habitat, so they don't want to leave that area. So typically what happens, you'll have the larger, the older, more dominant male breeding several or even many females.
So you have mother bears that are pretty much staying put where they are, although they have kicked their young out.
Yes.
These young, after a year, how big are they?
It depends on what they've been eating. If they've been eating natural foods, they may be 60, 70 pounds, 80 pounds. It is a lot of variation depending on the condition they were in when they came out of the den. If they've been living off of garbage or feeding out of a dumpster with mom all year, they could easily weigh over 100 pounds.
So they're nowhere near full grown?
No.
Okay, so they're maybe a third grown, somewhere in there.
Depending on their diet, yeah. Yeah, an adult male, on average, is probably in that 275, 300 range. And when you get over 4 years of age, they can really start putting on some weight.
That's when the big dudes. So daddy bear, 400 pounds plus, how much?
Biggest we've handled is probably about 550 pounds. This is in Kentucky.
That's a dude.
That's a big bear. Yeah.
So these big bears are roaming around looking for what they want to make into a new mama bear.
Yes.
And they will find them. But their range, somebody told me once, maybe 25 miles. Well, how far will they roam?
We've had bears radio collared that we have tracked via satellites that we've caught on Pine Mountain in Harlan County. And they've made a circular route through Virginia, Tennessee, almost to Knoxville.
Really?
And then back up to Black Mountain in Kentucky. That's a ways. That's an extreme example, but that is how extensive these bears can roam.
Now, is that in the course of a year?
That in particular incident, I believe, was just a matter of a couple months.
Really?
Even less than that for that individual. It was an oddity, but it was a good example of how just well-traveled these bears are. They go where they want, when they want.
Well, in a sense, that's good news, because if you see a bear in your backyard and you're in, I don't know, Pineville, and you see a bear in your backyard and that happens to be one of these bears who's roaming, he ain't going to be there tomorrow.
Very likely not, unless he's or she's getting food.
That would make a difference. At what point does a bear say, okay, I've lived off these people's garbage can long enough, it's time to go back out to the real purpose in life, and that's to find mama bear?
If it's in the summer months, usually that realization doesn't happen until, sadly, it's shot or we have to come and catch it. Because in the summer months, when the food is limited, they will hang around and obtain these human-related foods and just gorge themselves, especially if they're fed, because it doesn't get any easier than that. Now in August, late July, when the blackberries really come on, they'll leave these human areas of development and go back to the woods. And a lot of people don't believe that. Oh, I've got donuts out. You can put all the donuts out you want, but when these natural foods come on, especially in September, October, November, when the hard mast, the acorns start appearing, these bears, like magnets, go back to the woods, because that's how cubs are made, and that's how bears make it through the winter, by eating these acorns and just gorging themselves. Now, if that's not there, then yeah, they will still rely on human foods. But in the summer months, it's a tricky situation, because there's sadly, in some areas, there's more human-related food available than natural food. In those instances, a lot of times we do have to go in and get those animals, or someone shoots them.
It sounds to me like if you just kept your garbage away and a bear does pass by, he'll keep on going.
That's exactly right.
So that would be the thing. Let's talk about keeping the human attractants down? Garbage cans, what are they?
Number one is garbage, whether it be a dumpster or a garbage can. That's number one. Then we've got things like pet food. That's something people often will overlook. It's just a little bowl of pet food I keep on the porch. Well, it's a little bowl, but it's a pretty good snack for a bear, and you're just going to end up with a bear on your porch. So that's something to definitely be mindful of. Something else people very often overlook are their bird feeders. That's just a hanging, easy dessert for a bear.
Stephen, we got to get to a break. This is Charlie Baglin. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We are back in segment 2 of Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglin, and my guest is the state of Kentucky's black bear biologist, Steven Dobey. Now, Steven, I'm not going to slight you at all for your experience, because I know you have lived in these areas, not just lived and dealt with on a daily basis, but you've done that in the context of education. What you have learned, experienced, and researched has helped black bear biologists that have come along behind you. And so you have the book sense, but still a lot of folks in eastern Kentucky that live with this day in, day out, year-round, they have the street sense. So I'm wondering which one is going to win, and I'm wondering if one can't help the other. If I were the person living in the small house in Hindman, what would they have said? Well, yeah, that's true, but...
That they don't roam, or they will go back to the quote-unquote wild areas, and the bears don't roam that much. People just often can't fathom how wide-ranging these bears are. And just because one bear's in your garbage, and it takes off and it's gone, the problem's not gone. If your garbage is still there, the lure is there. And even if that bear's gone, another one's going to show up.
And they all look alike.
Exactly. And so oftentimes we'll either get the misconception that is one bear causing a lot of problems. And oftentimes that is true. But unless you remove that attractant, you're never going to be able to keep bears from coming in, because I tell you, they are here to stay. These are not bears or animals that we put here, like wild turkey, deer, elk. All these bears that we have today are just from natural expansion onto Pine Mountain from Virginia, West Virginia, and more recently around Big South Fork. Those bears come up out of Tennessee. So they are certainly here to stay. And it's the public mindset that, well, is just going to have to change, because what we have right now is a generation of people who have not had to deal with bears in their lifetime. And in Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, that's very different. They've had bears for 50, 60 years. And you don't see a lot of these issues that we see. And it's just a product of just learning to cope.
I suspect that somebody might say, Stephen, I do all these things. I have a lock on my trash can lid, and I don't put pet food out. And I'm diligent about keeping the human sense away. But they still come. Mm-hmm. Or they are still there. And I'm scared for my kids to go out and play in the backyard. What do you do then? And is it your job to do anything other than educate?
Education is a huge part of it, especially nationwide. Education is huge, but in Kentucky in particular, because of what I mentioned before, a lot of folks just have never had to contend with bears. We have a lot of people right now in eastern Kentucky that have never seen a bear in the wild, and chances are that's going to change, and perhaps very soon, because our population is expanding. But black bears are pretty reclusive animals, meaning they tend to keep to themselves unless it's during the breeding season. Or a female with young, they're solitary throughout the year. They tend to stay away from people. And if they have no reason to associate people with food, i.e. through garbage, they will keep their distance.
Let's say I have an apple tree in the backyard, pear tree.
Yeah, that's a different situation. And that is much like with deer and raccoons and anything else that's going to show up under that tree, it's usually, unless there's an electric fence around it, a pretty easy food source. They can be deterred, making lots of noise, using dogs. If you're in the right setting, a very remote area, firing a weapon, not into the bear, but to make noise, scare the bear. That can often be enough to deter a bear. Of course, electric fences are just God's gift when it comes to bear management.
True. I was in Alaska in 1994, and camping with a buddy of mine who was working there. He said, "You're going to attract bears if you do this." I said, "Don't take any candy into your tent. You will attract bears." And I thought he was joking. They have pretty good noses, obviously.
Oh, they're incredible.
We did have a visit later that night. Of course, in the summer, it's daylight up there 24/7. And we had a visit from a moose about 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And moose aren't exactly friendly critters if they're looking around for something. But you can be confronted with wildlife. I don't care if that's a rattlesnake. If you can attract skunks to your property. Yeah. You can leave Twinkies out on the picnic table at night, but next thing you know, you got raccoons. And even though they eat them, the next night they're back. They're looking for more. They're bringing their buddies. They just don't forget where they saw the food.
That's right.
And so it's not unique to bears, these problems, even though there are no bears in Paducah that we know of.
No, I have not.
There are still plenty of wildlife that can come by and cause you a headache.
That's right. And it's just a matter of being mindful and realizing, when you're in nature like that, you just have to give those wild animals the respect they deserve because you're in their realm now.
I like bears, and they have every reason to like me back. I want for a bear what a bear needs. I want him to have habitat, him or her. I want him to have habitat. I want him to have plenty of blackberries and plenty of places to den and places to roam and all the habitat that bear needs. I want him to have. So I like bears, and they have every reason to like me back. I'm hoping that other people are like me. That doesn't mean I want to make a pet out of him. I don't want him coming over to my house at night. But are there more people out there with that mindset than I hate bears and I want to shoot every one of them?
It varies depending on where you are. In the state and even in the southeast, a lot of folks do see them just as a nuisance. But the reason that is because there's a continual presence, usually of garbage, and those bears, they make a mess. Bear's not going to delicately open a garbage container and pick out the little items that it wants. It's going to drag that bag out, and it's going to strew it all over your yard or over the hillside. And they're going to keep coming back with every bag you put in that garbage can. So they make a mess. They can be intimidating. They make your dogs bark at 3 o'clock in the morning. That being said, you look at the big picture, and the solution truly is relatively simple. And that's limiting access to that garbage. Now, some places, obviously, it's a financial issue of making a garbage can bear resistant. But, we're here to help. If that's an issue, contact us.
There once upon a time was a phrase used by the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife called Be Bear Aware. Mm-hmm. And it covers the things we're talking about now. Is that phrase still used?
It is. It certainly is. Just a little bit of knowledge goes a long way when it comes to bears. I still see messages, if you encounter a bear in the wild, what should you do? And there are certain things you should do. Obviously don't approach a bear, don't feed a bear, make a lot of noise, wave your arms. Oftentimes that's more than enough to scare a bear away. They can be intimidated. But then you'll hear some very poor misinformation out there. You don't want to ever run from a bear. And I've heard that recently, people promoting that.
Let's repeat that. You don't want to run, because that question was posed to me. I was going to have this interview. Mm-hmm. What do you do if you run in? Do you run from a bear?
Absolutely not.
And why is that?
Well, bears, although probably about 98% of their annual diet is all plant matter, they don't eat a lot of meat. They don't need it. Even though they mostly eat plants, they are carnivores, and they're predators. And it's just ingrained in them, if something is running away from me, I should probably chase it. It's just ingrained. So very often, if you run from a bear, it's probably going to chase you, honestly, and perhaps with no intent of harm.
And when it catches you, what's it do then?
Hopefully that's the question we don't have to answer. Because
is that when you roll up in a ball, I've heard, and say your prayers?
No. With black bears, you want to absolutely fight back.
Really?
Yep. You want to not only defend yourself, but physically fight back and be the more aggressive force. And that's
yell and scream and kick and fight and cuss
fighting
and
back.
on.
That's what saved a lot of people's lives when it comes to black bears, is by fighting back.
That's when adrenaline kicks in.
That's right.
90 miles an hour.
Oh, yeah.
I would hope that when this happens to me, if I ever confronted a bear, that I say, oh, yeah, Steven said to do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
I would probably freak. And I can see me right now. Of course, if you're with a friend, you don't have to, outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your friend.
That's right. That's different.
But if you're alone,
you just want to make as much noise as possible. And, honestly, yelling like that primarily will scare the bear off. But what it's also going to do is to alert other people around you that you may be in distress. You're going to get more people to show up.
Yeah.
And again, that's just something that's going to intimidate that bear even more. So you definitely want to yell. Grab some trees around you, some smaller saplings, shake them.
Yeah.
That bear's not going to know what you're doing. It's just going to see this massive object moving. Chances are that's going to be enough to cause that animal to leave the scene.
All right, we've been talking about one bear. What if there's 2 bears, 3, 4?
The only time you would encounter this issue really is if you walked upon a mother and a female. A female and her offspring. The rest of the year they're solitary, so you're going to stumble one at a time typically.
Talking with Steven Dobey on Kentucky Afield Radio, black bear biologist for the state of Kentucky. In our next segment, I'm looking forward to this. The sounds that bears make. You think you know the sounds they make? You may be mistaken, but you may be right. This is Kentucky Afield Radio. Charlie Baglin back here on Kentucky Afield Radio. Steven Dobey standing by. I want to put in a plug for our weekly newsletter. It's called Kentucky Afield Notes. It's an email. It's not a paper thing. It's something we send you generally on Thursday, maybe Friday of each week. Lets you know the topics for that week's show. You can see what Tim Farmer and the crew have coming up on KET, on Kentucky Afield Television, and what's on Kentucky Afield Radio. Simple thing, just go to kyafield.com, scroll down, you'll see on the bottom right-hand side of the page Tim Farmer's smiling face. It will say newsletter. Click on that, give us your email address, that's all we need. We send you one thing a week and we use it for nothing else. It's one newsletter that keeps you up with 2 great outdoor shows, Kentucky Afield Radio and TV. In a nutshell, it's the newsletter that lets you know first. Time now for the fishing report.
This is Tom with your fishing report from the Northeast. Cave Run Lake temperatures are in the 80s and fishing opportunities have moved into our summer patterns. Bluegill fishing with an ultralight spinning rod or fly rod can be a lot of fun this time of year. Places to look at would be Wood Green and Reba in Madison County, Mill Creek and Natural Bridge State Park, Grayson or Cave Run Lakes, and of course your local farm ponds. Bluegill will fight pretty hard on this lighter gear, which is fun for anyone, and they can be easier to catch, which means they're a great way to introduce a kid to the sport. Having been through a week of 90-degree air temperatures, I don't think you can forget wade fishing in your local creeks and streams. Some notable streams in our district include Slate Creek, Triplet Creek, Middle Fork of Red River, and Johnson Creek. Rebel craws are great on smallmouth, and smaller rooster tails will keep you catching sunfish all day long. Just remember with wade fishing to ask permission before accessing the stream. That should do it for us. Wherever you go, good luck and stay safe.
This is Kevin Fry with your Eastern Area Fisheries Report. Some of the best reports coming in are from our stream anglers currently. Smallmouth bass and rock bass have been aggressive on lures and various baits such as hellgrammites and redworms. Largemouth bass reports are good for larger fish to 20 inches at most reservoirs. These larger fish are holding close to brush or wood in shallow water. The Dewey Lake has had good catches of largemouth bass, and the lake is still providing good white bass fishing for fish and jumps. Catfish reports have been fair from area lakes. Rod and reel, jugs, limb lines, and trout lines are all getting similar results for channel catfish. With low oxygen on bottom in deeper water, trout lines may need to be run sooner than expected. Until early fall, it would be best to keep trout lines on bottom in shallow water.
This is Eric Cummins with your Southwest Kentucky Fishing Report. Barren River Lake thermocline depths are running around 15 foot. Bass bite is best early and late and at night. Hybrids likewise are best early and late in the day with shad and crankbaits, swim baits, and at night with topwaters, with your best bite being after midnight. Green River Lake thermocline depth is also at about 15 foot. Bass are best at low light times or at night with tube baits, plastic worms, or plastic craws in top waters. Small river and creeks like Little Barren, Drake's Creek, Gasper, Russell, and Red Rivers are good floating fishing opportunities for bass, rock bass, and sunfish. As always, good luck and good fishing. Be sure you wear your life jacket.
Swimming has taken me around the world.
Olympic swimming gold medalist Rachel Comazar.
It's a thrill to swim for your country, but it's another to swim for your life. In a boating accident, that's what happens. It can happen to you. You could be hurt, dazed, unconscious. Being a good swimmer isn't good enough. When fun turns frantic, trust me, your life jacket is as good as gold.
Kentucky Fish and Wildlife reminds you, your life jacket's got your back and the backing of the best swimmers everywhere. The voice of the great outdoors, and that sounds official, since 1953. Kentucky Afield Radio's Charlie Baglin in, talking with the state's bear biologist, Steven Dobey.
A mother and a female, like with most wildlife, is something that they can be very defensive. And that's a very important distinction there. I didn't say aggressive. A lot of people see bears and say, it made this chomping sound with his mouth, which they do. It's a defensive means. It says, hey, you're getting too close. Or they'll bluff charge. They'll lunge forward and they'll stop. They will swat the ground with their paw. A lot of say, the bear was aggressive. It came after me. When in fact, those behaviors that I described are not aggressive behaviors. They are defensive behaviors, and obviously bears can't talk. That's how they relay to other creatures that you need to back up. You're too close to me.
The sounds that bears make, are they really what people think they are?
No, not at all. And we hear that a lot. We hear, there was something out on my porch and I heard it. What did you hear? I heard a growl. Did you see it? Well, no. Usually it seems like the term growl is just kind of used universally when it comes to bears. But their vocalizations are actually very distinct. And typically if you hear it, you know what it is.
We brought the subject up because there was a time, now I'm going to say half a dozen years or so ago, you and I did a piece for an audio tour, a wildlife audio tour. It goes into all that. It's really worth listening to. If you think you've heard a bear, listen to this, because I have a feeling maybe you haven't after all. Biologists who tromp through the forests and fields in search of wildlife don't just rely on what they see. They also depend on what they hear. From bird calls to elk bugling to the conversations held by black bears. Of the variety of sounds bears make, we'll highlight 4.
Bears as a whole have a fairly wide variety and a large suite of vocalizations that they use to communicate one emotion or message to other bears that a lot of animals don't have.
Steve Dobey, Kentucky's black bear biologist, translates.
This sound we're hearing now is a vocalization made by black bear cubs as they're feeding. They're nursing from the mother, and it's a sound of contentment. When we're doing den work, often we know a female has cubs by listening for this sound. This sound is a distress call made by cubs. You'll hear this when you have a cub that perhaps has gotten possibly temporarily stuck or maybe wedged somewhere and he can't seem to get himself out, and mom will come running and assist. That bear is just scared, it's frightened, or simply just separated from its mother. This sound is a threatening gesture when they perhaps feel cornered or are about to engage in some kind of aggressive physical contact with another bear. That kind of a popping sound you hear, more or less snapping his jaws together. It's chomping motion followed by a blow, which tells other bears back away or could get physical. This vocalization is a threatening vocalization made by black bears, used as a last resort before physical contact is made.
This boing blast isn't some cheap cartoon sound we tossed in for effect. It's the real-life, pulsating warning produced by the bear.
And often at the encounters too close, you'll hear some vocalizations such as this, and a sense of telling each other, all right, it's almost time to fight.
The bear vocalizations we've been hearing were captured by black bear researcher Dr. Lynn Rogers of Ely, Minnesota. To hear more, visit bear.org. I don't think I've heard ever any of those until you and I did this piece.
Yeah.
So I guess you can learn from it what you're hearing. I don't know what you're hearing, probably raccoons.
Could be raccoons fighting. They can make the most awful noises. Coyotes, feral wild dogs, yeah, you name it. There's a lot out there, but the sounds made by bears are pretty distinct.
There's a generation that was raised thinking bears were nice animals, that they were fun. They liked to steal picnic baskets, and they wore cute little hats. And that was the same generation that grew up with Woodsy Owl or Smokey Bear or Bambi. And it's almost in our heads that it's fun to feed bears. What is a trip to the Smokies without feeding the bear? It's wasted. You are wasting your time and effort to go all the way there and not stop and feed a bear. But you've been there. You've worked that area.
I've worked there.
But I don't know if you want to blame Hollywood, but we grew up with that.
And in the 50s and 60s, when this really first started, hitting the mainstream media, interest in wildlife, it served a purpose. It educated people. People didn't know what bears look like. And sadly, it was typically associated with feeding or some kind of behavior like that. And you go to the Smokies now and do that, and your best guarantee is you're going to walk away with a very hefty fine and maybe asked to not come back. So, and rightfully so.
So they will ticket you.
Very much so.
How's that work? Because they've got to ticket 1,000 people a day.
Ticket's great. If they can find someone and teach them, I don't need to do this, but the damage has been done. That bear's learned that, hey, those things that walk on two legs, they equal food.
Well, how about those things that drive big metal things that have four wheels? Now, I know that they're used to seeing traffic. They may associate people with food, but do they associate cars with food?
If we have people, we had an instance over Memorial Day on the Kentucky-Virginia line where people started feeding this bear from their car. And word got out primarily, and this is something we didn't have to contend with 5 years ago, but through Facebook. And within a week's time, people were taking 50-pound bags of dog food and driving down the road, pouring this dog food down the middle of the road, and then coming back in the evening and just sitting there and watching bears. In that instance, those bears most definitely learned that people and cars equal food. It got to the point this bear was physically leaning into car windows to accept food, and people were petting it. And, of course, we had to go in there and trap that animal and euthanize it. So their behavior signed the death warrant on that animal. And the reason is we can't release. It would be irresponsible of us to release a bear like that into the wild, because who knows what could happen. That fear of people has become lost. And it's going to, very often what happens, honestly, is the bear will, even if it does leave the area, it shows up in another neighborhood, just assumes, hey, those people are going to feed me too, runs right up to them, and boom, shot dead. And there was an instance this summer in Alaska. Here's just an example of a gentleman who thought it would be cute to feed a bear. And so he starts, this case happened to be barbecue, so he's feeding this bear right in front of him, and the guy runs out of food. Guess what happens? The bear jumps on him and mauls him. That does not happen often, but it can. And that is something that we as the managing agency for bears, we're just not willing to risk that.
I have a cat. He's a big old black and white cat, twice the size any cat should be. And the joke is he's keeping bears away. If we're on a picnic, if we're grilling burgers in the backyard on the deck, and he's out, he's keeping bears away. I'm able to paint this basement because he's keeping bears away. That's sort of a silly thing to say, but in a way it's cute. Unless you live in bear country, then you say you don't know what you're saying. But what if the bear is small? And what if he were almost as big as that bear? Or what if you had a big dog, big black chow? What if then? And that bear was small, one of these yearlings, and they were about the same size. Could pets then keep bears away, are they a deterrent at all, or do the pets then still, would they run from the bear?
Generally, dogs, because they can be pretty vocal, they can serve as a pretty meaningful deterrent, unless, just like we discussed earlier, if that bear is if it's just ingrained in his behavior now that, there's one of those trash cans, I'm going to get a meal out of that. A lot of times, it doesn't matter what gets in between him or her and that trash can. They'll sit there and dig right through it with a dog on a chain 10 feet away, barking its head off, and they won't even give it a second look. But if it's an animal that has not become conditioned to people, and it's just maybe stumbling upon a house or a neighborhood for the first time, and its first introduction is a dog running after it, that's fantastic. Because that's going to teach that bear, hey, stay away.
Stay away from people, stay away from dogs.
That being said, I have seen video footage of a cat chasing a bear up a tree.
Wasn't my cat. He was too lazy because he was busy laying around sleeping, keeping bears away. It's the funniest thing, but I say it and people believe that I believe that. Let's see what else I have on my list. Is there any way to put a count as we would deer or turkey?
Not really, no, because bears, unlike those other animals for which we have abundance estimates right now, they're tough to estimate because they're solitary animals. They overlap home ranges. There's no territoriality. You can't just assume one animal lives here, one animal lives here, so we can count them.
But there's more than there was. Oh,
by far. Yeah, we are far past the point of bears are establishing themselves in Kentucky. We are far past that now. Bears are here. They're established in Kentucky, and now it's a product of how far are they going to expand in range and abundance.
Stevie, anybody wanted to look and find out more about this, read more about this, you hate to send them to a website, but that's kind of the thing to do. What is a good one to go to?
Well, you can go to fw.ky.gov. Go into the program or species link, and we have a bear section. You can look at our management information, which covers our hunting materials, dates, maps, etc. And then there's a biology section that just talks about bears in general, a lot of their biology, movements, reproduction, behavior, and you can also learn about how to avoid human-bear conflicts.
fw.ky.gov. Steve, thank you.
My pleasure.
Steven Dobey, Kentucky's black bear biologist with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're going to a break. Hang tight. This is Kentucky Afield Radio. We stir up a hornet's nest. Next on Kentucky Afield Radio. Spexophobia. You probably haven't heard of that word, though it will likely apply to you. It's the fear of wasps. Fortunately, we don't need to be overly concerned given our infrequent contact with this bug of summer. But when they do cross our path, we give them our undivided attention.
There's no real reason to be afraid of them. They're not going to attack you unless you start going at them and smacking at them and things like that.
That's Dr. Dave Gordon, an entomologist and a volunteer with the Kentucky Backyard Wildlife Program. He tells us Kentucky has a variety of wasps, including the cicada killer wasp, hornets, and a dozen or so species of yellow jackets. The common reddish-black wasp is called a paper wasp. It gets its name because of its nest. It appears to be constructed of paper.
It'll start out maybe with 3 to 5 or 6 young, and they will forage and raise young, so the next batch might have 10. The next batch will be bigger, the next batch will be bigger.
And as summer progresses,
they will get to be, maybe 100 to 200 insects in there.
Flies aside, we get the impression that bugs ignore people, but not a wasp. A wasp is well aware of our presence, especially when we're near its nest.
It's pretty impressive when you walk up to that nest and you look at it, and they're all turn and look at you. And you like dogs will do, that the closer you get, they'll start to growl or their lip goes up. Well, wasps have the same kinds of things. They all turn and they look at you, and they're giving you the signal, that's close enough, buddy. And if you get much closer, then they start flying out and will sting you.
The nest of a paper wasp is generally found under ledges or eaves, and it's only the female that stings.
When they sting you, they mark you with a chemical. And remember, these things are highly tuned into chemicals. And it says sting here. And so once you get stung, then the chances of you getting stung again, if you stay there, is even better. And the more that they sting you, it just kind of lowers their aggression threshold, and they'll all come and sting you then.
Swatting and trying to shoo biting insects away can sometimes only excite them further. Plus, just as a mosquito is attracted to the carbon dioxide we breathe out, other scents attached to humans can excite a wasp.
Certain kinds of hairspray, certain perfumes and things like that, you have to be real careful. And also, if you're real sweaty or smelly, these insects are very finely tuned into smells.
Larger cicada killer wasps can grow up to 2 inches, but they want nothing to do with humans, and they're not likely to sting us even if we pester them a little. And even our everyday paper wasp can be considered a good guy.
Actually, they are beneficial insects. If you look in the vegetation, you see them just sort of flying around, and they go in and out, and they're looking in the leaves, and that's what they're doing, is they're hunting. So they do a lot to keep things in your garden down. And not only just our garden, we have to remember that, for wildlife, birds are going to eat wasps. Bats eat them.
In the wild, or even in wild areas of your yard, wasps have their role in nature. But closer to home comes the need for pest control, and depending on the level of control you need, remember it's not as simple as a can of Raid. Experts recommend eliminating wasps by targeting their nest. Wear safety glasses and a beekeeper's veil and protective clothing, then spray the poison. And the best time to do all of this is when the insects are at rest, at night. Overkill? Rather that than overpowered by hundreds of stinging insects who had plans for tomorrow. Kentucky Afield Radio is a broadcast service of the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife, your partner in the great outdoors. Charlie Baglin, Kentucky Afield Radio. Show is almost over, but there is time for a good dog story. This one is out of New York. It's a canine police dog. The headline reads, and I believe this was out of the New York Times, "Injured making arrest, Bear, the police dog, becomes a celebrity." I do like a German Shepherd. You just want to walk right up to them and pet them and tell them they're a good dog. This one's a 6-year-old German Shepherd. His name is Bear. He works with the Transit Bureau. His handler is Officer Vincent Tinneber. We'll go with Tinneber. I think that's at least close. I like how in Kentucky we run across a name that we don't readily recognize. We'll just say, he must be from out of town. So Officer Tinneber, I do believe, is from out of town. It all seemed like a routine call. It was a Tuesday morning, but it turned into something else. Officer Tinneber and the dog Bear were coming to the aid of another officer who was trying to break up a fight among 4 women on a subway platform. 4 women fighting. I like it already. 99% of the time when we come to the scene, people tend to cooperate. So nobody wants to be bitten by a dog. But instead of backing down, one woman kicked Bear right in the face as she was struggling with the other officers. When she kicked a second time, Officer, how do I pronounce this, Tivener, said Bear caught her foot in his mouth. He apprehended her foot and held her until the officers could get cuffs on her. The officer, I'm just going with the officer now, added that the dog's involvement in all this and the injuries that he suffered really captured the imagination of the police and media everywhere. The dog apparently has a pretty good service history, and a long one with assaults and other violent acts. For the officer, meanwhile, the media attention was about all that he and Bear could bear. Overwhelming, it says. 5 television appearances, several radio interviews, and a throng of reporters, and the officer would just simply say, I was just doing my job, and Bear was just doing his. The doggy was doing as he was trained. Wound up with 4 cracked teeth, though, and the dog is expected to get caps for his broken teeth, 4 in all. When a reporter asked the officer, does he bite? Looks like a nice dog. Does he bite? And his reply was basically this. He said, on the job, Bear's jaws are akin to an officer's service revolver, and he uses his teeth tactily. After all, he did penetrate the woman's shoe, and that's chomping down. It was as if he had pulled his gun, but didn't fire. The officer said he knows his partner, Bear, very well, At home, he was just like any other dog. He hangs around with kids, chews on toys, plays with the children, and that's common in the canine law enforcement industry. The dog goes home with its handler, and at home is just a regular pet. But at work, the dog watches the officer's back and vice versa. And that's pretty much true for canine handlers anywhere around the world. That's one more reason why I say there is nothing better than a dog. Out of time. This is Charlie Baglin on Kentucky Afield Radio, inviting you to come back again in a week. We will go inside outdoors again here on Kentucky Afield Radio.